you ready? And it's on?
Yeah. Is it on?
It's going to take ages for your hand to come on.
It will be on in... Careful with your fingers there. No, it's done it.
Put him on a piece of tissue, throw it in the fucking toilet.
And it's on?
Yeah. How are you, alright?
What's happening?
I don't know. Having a chat. See what people want to know about and what I can answer. Starting with who always starts us off very well.
What is a legitimate form of protest?
Well, this relates quite... I was at Piccadilly Circus this morning. Lots of police around. And I said, what's going on? And they said, oh, just policing. No, I said, that's not policing. The police are everywhere. And then she said, oh, protest. I said, what protest? And she said, oh, Extinction Rebellion. I said, stinky rebels. And she said, yes. Sorry, my bag is blue. If you need to pick that thing up, down here. Also the chest set here. There's a board and chest set here. It's all in there, yeah. So the question then comes, well, what do you make of people sitting down on the street, sticking themselves to the floor, sticking themselves to the wall in a Van Gogh, chucking soup over a Van Gogh? Although they phrased that quite well, it was quite a clever little story they came out with there. They spun there, but
there's a new video of them spraying Aston Martin just today.
Yeah. I mean, I had a long conversation. Me and Danny here had a long conversation with Roger Hallam, who invented the theory of the Extinction Rebellion protests. And this idea was that if you can, his PhD basically is what is being played out on the streets at the moment. And it was that if you can galvanise 3% of the population behind you, then you can shift 50% of the population. And you can get the general public to support your point of view. So that's where the theory guiding the actions of Extinction Rebellion come from. I think that it may be historically true that in the protest study by Roger Hallam that has some validity. Of course, if you know that and use it almost like a formula, then perhaps that's not true, because what you could get is an Extinction Rebellion person sticking themselves to the floor, an anti-Extinction Rebellion person blocking the road with their car and running the engine, a person who's against Extinction Rebellion and the driver standing between them and sticking themselves to both of them. And at what point do you end up with a sticky situation? Quite quickly. And so the question is one side, are the demands legitimate? The second side is it legitimate for a tiny group of people to use whatever actions they feel are necessary to raise an issue? And Roger Hallam was quite clear when we went to discuss with him. Danny was sitting there. He liked Danny because Danny has done lots of actions on the streets over the years and gets a lot of traction with them, a certain attention with them. But he doesn't block buildings or block roads or anything like that. Their argument, of course, is that we are in the biggest existential crisis in world history, and that existential crisis is caused by fossil fuels, and therefore it's legitimate to blockade, to take any action within peaceable means to achieve your objectives. That's their argument. So then you have to enter the parameters of saying, well, is it accurate to say that the world is facing a generalized extinction? And if it is accurate to say that, is it legitimate to take the action they're taking to blockade the street? And there are extreme examples of that. For example, an ambulance getting blocked, or people being hindered from doing exactly what they need to do, which might be in the public good. And they're saying, my moral cause is higher than anybody else's moral cause. And therefore we have a right to do what we want. On one of the demonstrations of Extinction Rebellion, I asked some people there, you are saying that within 11 years it was then, she had a timetable to extinction. And I said, well, you're saying that within this amount of time, 11 years or something of that nature, the world will be facing a terminal extinction. And therefore I said to her, well, what about when we get to 2 months before then? Or 1 month before then? Or 1 day before then? What are you entitled to do then? If you get to that point where you believe the world is literally going to be destroyed by fossil fuel companies or something like that. Would it be legitimate then to blow things up, to slaughter people, to kidnap people and threaten to kill them? Because that's how, by the way, the Baader-Meinhof group emerged in Germany, the Red Army in Tokyo emerged, and many other groups like that. Urban terrorist groups that came out of petty bourgeois middle class protesters who were disillusioned with not being able to achieve their objectives by their normal protest means, and who believed that they had just cause rising above anybody else's. At what point is terror, murder and killing legitimate? And so she just turned one of these protesters and said, well, we would never use terror, never use violence. So that's how I'd pose the question. I'm not giving a definitive answer in the sense of, no, you cannot protest in that way. But I do think some types of protest are counterproductive. And some protesters, one thing we can learn from them is some protesters who are not used to tactics of protest, sometimes they don't protest hard enough. So for example, in the anti-lockdown movement, sometimes we didn't protest hard enough. We backed off too easily.
Right.
People were, unwilling to stick their neck out or get arrested. It wouldn't have been a bad idea in the anti-lockdown protest. For example, on the 28th of November 2020, we came into the park here. There must have been 25,000 people. There were lots of police, van loads, a few thousand perhaps, but we were 25,000. If at that time we were at a committee, people have been committed, 5,000 people to say, I'm happy to get arrested. Join arms, go on, do it. I think that would have been a good tactic to do. And we had the numbers to do that. But unfortunately, some people in the anti-lockdown movement, I don't know why, thought it was appropriate to say, when I was getting arrested over there, for example, the police just ran up to me, grabbed me, dragged me onto the floor, 20 of them surrounded me, pushed me, got my arms behind my back. But instead of creating a ring around them, people were shouting back, keep marching, keep marching, keep marching. I think that's idiotic. If your comrades are being arrested, you defend them and you challenge. Well, I don't know if it's novices or what it was, but it was stupid. And by the way in which the anti-lockdown, the people who protested in that way at that time, continue to organise protests based on telegram groups rather than public statements, we will meet there and then and do this. It means that a small group of people, no matter how well committed or determined they are, or how they were the first people on the march or whatever, unfortunately what that means is that you alienate yourself from the mass of people and you weaken the movement rather than strengthening it. And you create an elite atmosphere within the movement that is controlled by a tiny group of people who know best what to do. I've always said on demonstrations, because I'm used to going on demonstrations for left-wing demonstrations, anti-war demonstrations, miners' strike demonstrations, poll tax demonstrations, all these type of demonstrations. I always said to them, when you get to Trafalgar Square, don't have Archbishop Huddleston, Bianca Jagger, Jeremy Corbyn, Tony Benn and whoever else as the only speakers. Yes, you can have star speakers, but then what you need to do is have a 10, 20 platforms, like here at Speaker's Corner, where people with different views about strategy and tactics and about where we're at should be able to stand up in front of the crowd and say, I believe we should march on Parliament. I believe we should march on Buckingham Palace. I believe we should occupy the streets and then take a vote there and then on the views that are expressed. And in that way, you guarantee the police cannot know in advance what you're planning, because the vote happens there and then.
Right.
And therefore they are cornered by the circumstances. And if you've got 10,000, or as we sometimes had in the anti-lockdown movement, 500,000 people, then you could easily defeat them in a single day by determined action on the streets, democratically controlled by the participants of the protest itself.
Go on, Heiko.
That's what I think. That's how I think the protest
Well
movement
done.
should be organised. Not only this protest, but any protest movement. And one thing is noticeable. When I've gone to the Extinction Rebellion protests and gone and had a look at the way they're operating, they are not operating democratically. They have people who tell them how to manipulate their own members. They have a financial core which pays full-time staff to organise their protests and organise their stunts. And then when they've discussed what they're going to do, they break up into groups, discuss different ideas, and then they come back and bring those ideas which have been suggested to them by the group without a democratic vote, suggested to them, and then they say we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So you look at the way they organise their protests. Go on one of their protests and you'll see there are no votes for and against anything, which is an indication of an undemocratic movement, probably organised by some people from above. But that's how I see Extinction Rebellion. It doesn't mean it only could be that. It could become democratic. But that's why I believe it's correct to debate and discuss the issue, all the issues. You can't come to people and say, I demand you support my point of view, and if you don't, you ostracise them and drive them out. I don't believe that's democratic at all, nor is going to build the strength of a movement. You should be able to discuss with the people, engage them in discussion, engage them in debate, engage them in joint activity, and openly discuss and debate and disagree and agree. In that way you formulate your ideas and experience. That's what we do at Speaker's Corner, that's what we're about here. We come up here and we got different points of view. I wandered around earlier on, I discussed with conservatives. I don't have a problem discussing with someone who's a conservative. I don't go, oh my God, the devil's in front of me. I discuss with them and debate with them. I let them give their point of view. How else are you going to learn about what's happening in society if you're not prepared to listen what other people are saying? Now, of course, the British government, what a farce it is. What an utter farce we've got. We had 3 months of a ridiculous, farcical election campaign for Liz Truss to stand next to Rishi Sunak and all the other idiots they had standing to replace Boris Johnson. After 3 months they announced that Liz Truss has won. Hurrah! And then she appoints Quarting, is it Quarting they call his name, Quarting, as the treasurer.
She actually won after the first.
Sorry?
After the first month of the election, she had won. She was 101 on Betfair. Everybody knew the month, 2 months.
Well, that's
correct.
fair though, isn't it?
No, but she knew 2 months in advance.
Okay, but even so, there's a formality in the process of election. The Conservative Party, it's not a democratic because the population don't vote on it. But okay, you've got a Conservative Party, they have votes. That's the structure of constitutional power in Britain. But in the last week, when they removed the Chancellor of the Exchequer, what did they say on the television? Why was the Chancellor of the Exchequer removed? What was the reason they gave? Was it because Liz Truss didn't like him? Was it because the Conservative Party didn't like him? Was it because the population didn't like him? Was it because the Labour Party didn't like it? No, what they said was, the markets have spoken. So they're the people in command. It's not the Conservative Party, not the Labour Party, not politics, not news media. The markets. And who are the markets? Big business. International big business.
Go
They
on,
control
Heiko.
the game.
Woo!
They control the entire game. And they run society regardless of what political force you've got in power. Now they're in a big problem now. Now they're talking about we must remove Liz Truss. She's only just been elected, don't forget. We must remove Liz Truss. The markets might push the government the Conservative MPs to remove Liz Truss. I think it's possible she'll fall within a short period of time. I don't think about it weeks, but months, possibly she'll fall. And if she falls, eventually the markets will turn around and say, well, if we have a Labour government under Keir Starmer, might not be such a bad thing. Because one thing is, Labour can so discredit itself in the eyes of the markets and the population, and can take the blame for the economic collapse that happens or is happening here and across Europe in the name of fighting Vladimir Putin about the Donbass. That's what they're saying. It's about the Donbass. That's why we had to pay. I boiled an egg the other day, 20 pence. I checked it. 20 pence to boil a friggin' egg. That's what it costs now. At home, 20 pence. You heat your home and the money's gone. £2, £3 a day. People with families even more. And that in the name of the Donbass. Because we have always defended the Donbass. The people of the Donbass are part of Ukraine. They were, always have been, always will be, according to Britain. And we spend billions and billions for weapons to give to the Ukrainians to keep stoking the war in Ukraine. By the way, of course, behind it all is what? Notice the Saudi Arabians, who used to be extremely good friends with the Americans. You remember?
Oh, yes.
In Yemen, when they're slaughtering people in Yemen, America's all behind them. The Saudis played a double game. They supported bin Laden and they supported Israel. Bizarre as that sounds, sometimes in this type of global machinations, all options are open, you know, like in a chess game. All types of options are open. Now the Saudis have sided with the Russians about the price of oil, because they are the leaders in OPEC, alongside with Venezuela and a couple of Nigeria. Why? Because under Donald Trump they began this fracking process. The fracking meant that the United States now is the largest, I believe the largest producer in the world of oil. They're not having any problem about price of oil, price of gas. Who's got the problem? The Europeans and the Brits. Right across the continent of Europe, Europe is being smashed. Smashed. You know, they talk about Brexit and the Italian election and so on. Europe is being smashed, which means Germany is being smashed. Why is Germany being smashed? It doesn't have oil. It doesn't have gas. It was dependent upon the Russians. It didn't even have a proper army. It still doesn't really have a proper army. But potentially, of course, and we know this from history, potentially Germany has one of the strongest armies in the world. Because an army is not just the manpower, an army is the technology.
Hear, hear.
What type of technology does the country have? How quickly can that technology be transformed from civilian to military purposes? And do they have an enemy they need to fight? Well, they do have enemies. The number one enemy of Germany, and thereby of its control of the European Union, because it dominates the European Union. Remember Greece? 2015? The Greeks, they used to get them, you want to elect someone, again like Liz Truss, you want to elect someone? You want to elect Syriza? Push their head in the water, duck them down again and again and again until they say, yes, Germany, we will follow everything you say. And that's what happened. They removed the government, destroyed the pension system. People were going to the main square in Athens, who were 65, 70 years of age. They would blow their head off in the middle of the square because they didn't have enough to eat. All their life working. And they said, I can't survive like this. In Greece, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, they would blow their brains out. Now we've had years of this. Since 2008, look at Spain. In the south of Spain, a friend of mine lives down by Cadiz. This was before the pandemic. People go around with dark, dark glass, motorbike helmet on. And they go sifting through the bin because they're ashamed of showing that they're sifting through the bin to find food in Spain, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. In Brazil, they're going, oh no, the election is polarized in Brazil, they're saying. How terrible. Bolsonaro and Lula. polarized, how monstrous. Brazil produces food for 1 billion people on Earth. Its population is what? 250? 200,000? 200 million? 35 million people starving in a country that exports food to feed 1 billion people on Earth. 1,000 million people. Brazil, I've been to Brazil, you see families in Rio de Janeiro scuttling round on the streets, picking up any rubbish or dirt or things out the bin, stinking to high hell in 35 degrees centigrade. That they eat. And that's civilization for you. That's the civilization we've created. And then we are told we are defending, now we're defending democracy. Democracy. Don't forget the people who are defending democracy locked us up for 2 years. Locked us up in our homeland of democracy for 2 years. And now they say they're defending democracy in Ukraine. By the way, the Ukrainian people were not so bloody stupid. The Ukrainian people, only about 20% of the Ukrainian people are vaccinated. Only about 20%. And just before the war began, Britain passed a resolution, or Britain changed the regulation, better said, to allow anyone from Ukraine, whether they've got a PCR test or been vaccinated or not, to come to England. I think that was the first breach in the dam of the regulations about COVID controlling the movement of people around the world. To this day, you can't fly to America unless you've had a jab. What sort of psychotic is that? Just this week, the European Parliament, a member of Parliament asked one of the leaders of Pfizer, did you do trials to check about the transmissibility? About whether this thing could prevent you getting infected? They claimed, of course, that they have, but they haven't. They didn't. That's what came out this week. And in fact, although I don't want to break the rules on YouTube, otherwise this video will get taken down and people will be struck off and forbidden and banned. I've got a few points I should make, but I'll have to make them in a sort of roundabout way. Anybody seen that guy, Dr. John Campbell? He was a supporter of the whole narrative all the way through. But gradually, as time went by, he began to see they are lying through their teeth from beginning to end, manipulating the people in order to justify the interests of the ruling pharmaceutical companies in the world. And that's what we've got. We've got Big Pharma in command. Big Tech, the Big Pharma, by the way, is the biggest lobby in the United States of America. They're the guys who got the most influence over politics. So, the markets, you know. Then you got Big Tech, the ones who tell you what you're allowed and not allowed to think or say to each other, and who mediate our relationships, and who think our children will be raised into a three-dimensional world, wrapped round their head, just like you wrapped the mask around your mouth for 2 years. Now you wrap the goggles around your eyes and enter into a virtual world where our children will be safe and secure and trained by Mark Zuckerberg and his psychotic band of merry men. Metaverse, they call it. That's what they're advocating. That human beings should live in a cocoon surrounded by three-dimensional images and sound, which will govern their interactions on Earth. They will live, work and play like Mars bars inside the metaverse. That's the idea they're proposing.
Go on, Heiko! Woo! Well done.
Google, they watch you everywhere. You know, Starlink. You know Elon Musk. What a hero he is. Elon Musk with his Starlink.
Oh.
What is his Starlink? Starlink is like a squatter. A squatter who occupies space. And that means that no one else can occupy that space unless they eject the squatter. But the only way to eject the squatter is to blow them up. They're already setting up, I think it's 30,000 Starlink satellites will encircle the Earth. And once you've occupied those spaces, no one else can go there. And he who controls space controls the Earth. Why? Because the only reason they sent a rocket to the moon, the only reason they set up satellites into space, the only reason they sent rockets into space was to see if they could fire something and land it on human beings somewhere else on the planet. They're not interested in what dust is on the moon, or what resources are on Mars, or about the future of mankind when the sun expands and contracts and disappears in 10 billion years, or whenever that's supposed to. They couldn't give a shit about that. All they care about is control of human beings on Earth. And we are dispensable cannon fodder. The Ukrainians, sadly for them, are dispensable cannon fodder in a global battle for power. That's the game. Don't make it. And anybody tells you, I mean, I've been in discussions with peers and others, or peers have been in a short while, about this whole Great Reset thing. To be honest with you, I think that story's over. I think that's finished. Because the clash between the major powers is about resources and manpower. So the Great Reset Brigade, you know, and the population control, there's nothing new about this. Malthus advocated population control at the beginning of the 19th century. Nothing new about that. They've been advocating because the ruling class is like the thing. If we get rid of the dirty poor, we can still be rich, and everyone, you know, there'll be less people, it'll be more pleasant for us, more land, more air, more freedom for us. There are people who think this. But because the battle goes on between real forces in the real world, not just in the mind of that bald-headed idiot with the cat, Klaus Schwab, but in the real world, in the battle between Putin and Russia and Ukraine and Germany and France and Germany, there are real battles between these powers. And yes, they were sucked in. They were sucked in by this globalization force. They were dragged into the world of this Great Reset dream, in which everyone would be vaccinated against everything through mRNA vaccines. But in reality, now we've got direct military conflict. And of course, Leon Trotsky once said, "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." How much truer today is that than ever before? What are they interested in? Control over the economic resources is warfare. Making you pay more for your electricity and gas. Warfare against you. And they're claiming, oh, you're all on board. We all voted for the war in Ukraine. We all voted to save the Ukrainian people. Like they give a shit about the Ukrainian people. When the Ukrainian refugees came over the border, there were a whole army of pimps who went to the border to find the young women to pimp them out to brothels in Europe. So what are they talking about? Protecting the Ukrainians. Absolute bullshit. They have never protected democracy and freedom, and you can tell that by reference to your own country, your own circumstances, your own world. They do not protect the workers' rights. They do not protect the people's health. They do not protect the people's freedom, and they do not protect democracy. In fact, they attack every single one of those so-called pinnacles of our free society. That's the reality of the way these people operate, of the way capital operates across the entire planet. So, you know, don't believe the bull. Where are we? Where are we?
Free speech.
Heiko, sorry, I missed the beginning. Who's they?
Well, that's a perfect legitimate question.
Excellent.
They means the capitalist elites within each country, but in particular within the wealthiest country.
Socialist elites or Marxist elites?
Yes, there are also. Within China, for example, China is the 20th Party Congress. China is a very powerful country. And you have a Communist Party elite backed by certain capitalist elites inside the country as well. But generally controlled...
Money is like quite important even to the socialists.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. On the one side, yes, because many people in the elite are corrupt and steal resources.
Everyone,
and steal resources. Well, I've never been this thing. And steal resources from the population. On the other side, because the Communist Party claims to be communist, it has to lean on support from the working class, from the urban masses. It has to keep them on board. Otherwise, there'll be an uprising and they'll be overthrown. And therefore, every now and again, they must arrest the business class or layers of the business class in order to pacify the working class. That's the way the balance of power operates inside China. That's just the simple fact of the dynamics of the operation. In Britain, there's a different balance of power. We do not control the economic resources. So everything is decided between big business interests. And one group of politicians lean on one section of big business, big tech and big pharma, for the last 2 years. Now oil and the military, oil and gas and the military, they're in the dominant position. And big tech and big pharma have been pushed to the side. Now you're getting attacks on big tech and big pharma. And things that people said, like Piers Corbyn, a year ago, that were forbidden, are now mainstream views in the media. Mainstream, about vaccine side effects and all. I don't want to go into detail because I'm not allowed to say these things because I'm marked, whereas they are allowed. But if you watch GB News, or you look in the Telegraph, or you look in the Spectator, or in unheard.com, or on John Campbell's show on YouTube, you will see all the criticisms that Piers Corbyn made a year ago, well, not all of them, but a lot of them, being repeated by these mainstream sources. And so, history moves. And you have to observe the motion of history to understand it. Nothing exists that's permanent. Everything's in transformation from one form to another.
Instead?
Sorry?
Wouldn't you say they're controlled instead?
Who's controlled?
Well, if they're able to talk about it, but we're not.
No. The control is about the fact that they must be in control. It's not about that they are controlled. They must be in control.
So why are only certain people allowed to talk about this, but certain people are not?
Well,
you see,
this is power because they control the apparatus
so there you go.
of dissemination of ideas.
What I'm saying. It's control.
It is control, but at the same time there are phrases used in the anti-lockdown movement like controlled opposition. And believe you me, I've had enough of the allegations about me like that. One person after another. If it's not for some people from the mad left, like this guy called Lister, idiot Lister. He tells you, Heiko Khoo is controlled opposition, seized control of Sarah Everard protest to turn it into a violent conflict. He's in alliance with Tommy Robinson and with the far right and with the ultra left or something like that in order to cause chaos. I mean, it's just madness. There's someone, I won't mention her, but she knows who she is, who's doing similar types of things at the moment, trying to undermine my economic existence. Someone slashed my car tyres, a couple of months ago. I don't know who, but I've got good reasons to think I do know who. And before that, I remember I did a protest in central London, and it was about a property law. Two guys came in the middle of the night and threw big rocks through my window, smashing my windows, huge rocks like this. The police caught them. I said, and someone said, oh yeah, that's them. And the police said, oh, we got nothing to hold them on. They threw fucking rocks through my window. Great big bloody windows, 5-6 rocks. And no, they can't be arrested. And the police arrest you, imprison you illegally. There's nothing you can do about it either. You have to take it on the chin. That's the way the system operates. It operates with multi-level control over the population. And of course, yes, the mass media is controlled by the interest of the elites. And sometimes they'll tighten up. The issue is this, is that within the elites, amongst the media, the journalists know fully well that they've been pimping themselves out for 2.5 years. But of course, there's nothing new about that, because most have been pimping themselves out all their lives, writing whatever they're told to write, or whether they know they should be writing to get past, to get a wage check at the end of the month. Now, once in a while, there are occasionally a few journalists who challenge this, or some groundbreakers like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, who challenge the whole narrative. And that, of course, they're very cautious in releasing that. And none of them, look at the journalists, not one of them stands up for Julian Assange, who's in prison for no charge whatsoever. Not one of them stands up for him amongst the mainstream journalists. They don't even say a whimper about it. When they were locking us down, beating us up, arresting us, stopping us from demonstrating, taking away our basic rights, locking us at home. Did any of the journalists protest? No, they said, we are mad conspiracy theorists. We are conspiracy theorists. And that's what they were writing. That's a conspiracy theory itself, saying that we're all conspiracy theorists. So, you can't go along with believing that these people are either controlled. They're not directly controlled. They just serve the interests, are on the gravy train. And when the society changes for the worse, we notice much more sharply what liars and cheats and criminals they are. That's the truth of the matter. Can you find a question?
Is freedom of expression and freedom of speech sacrosanct?
I was asked, is freedom of expression and freedom of speech sacrosanct? I think in general, yes. But of course, it depends in certain contexts. For example, if I stand up here and I have the freedom to speak to people, which is what we've got at Speaker's Corner. We don't have freedom of speech, we've got the freedom to speak to people. Slightly different thing. And if I stand up here and 5 people come into the meeting and shout at the top of their voices at me, either just shouting at the top of their voices so I can't be heard, or swearing and lying about me, then is that free speech? Is that really free speech? It's the undermining of free speech. So there is a qualification in that sense that, free speech is always constrained by the parameters of reality on the ground. All right, I've been speaking for a while. Thanks very much. See you again later.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Piers
Dr.
has just
Heiko
arrived.
Khoo.
Piers has just arrived to come and speak to you.
I have a similar situation myself. It's not a gathering.
Let me just sort this out.
Did they at least get their names?
They got their names and they did nothing about it.
But they've got their names.
They did get their names, but they didn't do anything.
You could ascertain who they are.
This is a long time ago now.